Up to this point, we've been basically editing on what is known as the horizontal plane. That is, we've been placing most of our clips on the same track in the timeline. Final Cut Express gives you the ability to add and edit tracks vertically as well. Vertical editing is essentially the stacking of video images that will interact in some way with one another. The technical term for this is called compositing. As I mentioned in Chapter 2, Final Cut Express gives you the ability to stack tracks up to 99 layers high. And up to this point, we've been working with only 2 video layers. There are a number of ways to add additional layers. The easiest method would be to control-click in the gray area just above the track icon and then choose Add Track from the pop-up. The types of images you can work with in these vertical tracks are video clips, graphic files, titles, and Photoshop documents. Just to get a feel for the different ways these layers interact with one another, let's drag and drop a clip into the V2 track. Final Cut Express uses a top-down metaphor, which means that the layer on top has visual priority when played back in the canvas or when the playhead is parked over it. In other words, the clip on V2 is blocking the video on V1 because it is entirely opaque. To cause the video on V2 to interact with the video on V1, we can do any number of things. One of the more common things would be to change the opacity of the clip on V2 so the clip on V1 can show through. If you click on this little button called Clip Overlays, you will get an opacity bar along the top of the clip. As you move your mouse pointer over it, the pointer changes to a north-south facing arrow that allows you to drag the opacity. Notice that as I drag, a yellow window pops up that tells me the current opacity percentage. Opacity adjustments will play back in real time as indicated by the green bar. I'll go ahead and drag the opacity all the way back up before I make further adjustments. Another fairly common practice is to create what's known as a picture-in-picture. You see this all the time in newscasts, and now it's even an option on most TV sets and allows you to watch Friends while simultaneously watching Monday Night Football in the small corner of the screen. To create this effect, you will need to scale or resize the video on V2. In the canvas window, select Image plus Wireframe. This will put a big X over your image with a number in the middle indicating what track you are about to manipulate. Now, I'll position my mouse pointer on the upper left corner of the wireframe, then click and drag toward the center of the clip. Notice that because the clip on V2 has been scaled, it now reveals the clip on V1 beneath it. If I click and drag in the center of the wireframe, I can move the clip to a different location. I can even rotate the clip if I position my cursor on one of the edges of the wireframe bounding box. There are also some other cool things you can do. In the tool palette, I can grab my crop tool and drag the side, the top, or even a corner to crop my image. The Distort tool allows me to do what it claims, that is, distort my image as I drag from one of the corners. Now let's look at another way to manipulate the properties of an image. Double-clicking on the clip in V2 will load the clip into the viewer for editing. Now I'll click on the Motion tab. Notice that in this window I have the same controls I just demonstrated with the mouse, only this window gives you a bit more precision and control. I'll start by resetting the motion properties I set a moment ago by clicking this circle with the red X. Now I'll reset the crop properties and then the distort properties. In addition to changing the basic motion properties with the mouse, Final Cut Express gives you sliders and input fields to adjust things as well. For example, I can drag the slider to scale the image up or down. If I want to scale by an exact amount, I can enter a number in this field and then hit the return key. I can also do the same thing with the rotation property, either drag on the little clock or enter a value. If you twirl down the triangle next to the word crop, you will see all of your cropping adjustments as sliders and input boxes. You even have the ability to feather the edge of your image. The distort and opacity properties we've already covered, but again, using this window will allow you to enter a more precise value. To add a drop shadow to your image, just click inside the little checkbox, then twirl down the triangle and drag the sliders and clocks to get the shadow you want. Now let's look at how to animate a layer. To animate this picture-in-picture effect on the timeline, we need to discuss some basic principles that govern how things get animated in Final Cut Express. Basically, in order to animate something, you need to set what's known as a keyframe. Think of a keyframe as a snapshot in time of a given clip's motion properties. Knowing what you want the animation to do is the first step in animating something, so let's have the image start in one corner of the screen and land in the opposite corner of the screen slightly bigger. Since the playhead represents the time element in Final Cut Express, I simply park the playhead where I want my animation to start, then adjust my motion properties. Now I'll set a keyframe by clicking this little button with a diamond in it. Final Cut Express tells you when a keyframe is set because the wireframe turns bright green. My next step is to move my playhead where I want the animation to end and then change the motion properties. You do not need to set a second keyframe for the new position. Final Cut Express automatically assumes you will want a keyframe there by virtue of the fact that you changed the playhead position in the timeline. Now all you need to do is back up your playhead, hit the spacebar, and watch your animation in real time. You can bring native Adobe Photoshop files directly into Final Cut Express for use in your composites or animations. The beauty of a Photoshop file is that Final Cut Express retains all the layers in the Photoshop document so you can composite them however you wish or even animate them. To import a Photoshop file, select Import File from the File menu, then navigate to your document. When working in Photoshop, remember that you must save the file as a PSD file if you want to retain the layers in Final Cut Express. Once imported, the Photoshop file becomes a sequence. If you double-click the sequence, you will see all of your Photoshop image layers as separate video tracks. If you turn on Image plus Wireframe, you can see that each layer can be independently manipulated and animated.